Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to present a comparative study on two iconic works of American literature: Shirley Jackson's classic 1948 story, The Lottery, and Suzanne Collins' 2008 dystopian novel, The Hunger Games. At first glance, a mid 20th century New England village and a futuristic, post apocalyptic nation might seem worlds apart. However, both stories tackle the same exact underlying question: how do societies use routine, tradition, and violence to maintain power and force humans and beings to conform? Let's dive in. Let's start with the lottery. When Jackson first published his story in The New Yorker in 1948, it generated more hate mail than almost any piece in the magazine's history. Why? Because it forced readers to look into a mirror. The story takes place in the small, ordinary town where the annual lottery is treated with the same casual routine as a square dance or as a civic meeting. The townspeople aren't portrayed as monsters, they're regular neighbors chatting about weather and chores, yet by the end of the day, they will stone one of their own to death. What Jackson shows us is the danger of blind obedience. The villagers no longer even remember why the lottery exists or how it started, but they continue doing it simply because there's always been a lottery. It is a chilling portrait of how normal people can commit horrific acts when routine replaces morality. A central symbol in Jackson's story is the old black box used to draw the names. Notice how Jackson describes it. It's splintered, faded, and worn down, built from fragments of an even older box. Mr. Summers, the organizer, occasionally suggests making a new box, but the villagers resist. The black box represents stagnant tradition. It proves that human societies often cling to decaying, harmful practices simply because they are familiar. The box isn't just a container for paper slips, it's a physical manifestation of an unexamined past that is holding a grip on the present. Now let's pivot to the Hunger Games. Moving from Jackson's quiet village to the nation of Panem, we shift from community driven tradition to state sponsored dictatorship. In the Hunger Games, the annual ritual isn't driven by a local thing or a local habit, but it's enforced at gunpoint by the capital. The capital forces each district to send two children to fight to death in a televised arena. Unlike the villagers in the lottery, who act out of mindless conformity, the citizens of Panem obey out of absolute terror. The games serve a very clear, calculated political purpose: to punish the districts for a past rebellion, demonstrate the capital's absolute power, and to turn human suffering into national entertainment to keep the masses divided. However, when the lottery ends in stagnant tragedy, the Hunger Games introduces the possibility of transformation through symbolic resistance. Enter the Mockingjay. The bird itself was an accidental hybrid, a mistake by the capital when their genetic weapon backfired. When Katniss Everdeen wears the Mockingjay pin, it transforms from a simple bird into a symbol of active revolution. This reminds the districts that the capital isn't invincible, and it shows how a single symbol of identity and autonomy can shatter an entire system of government control. When we compare these two texts directly, we see fascinating structural differences in how violence operates. In the lottery, violence is decentralized. It relies on passive conformity, where everyday citizens become the executioners. In the Hunger Games, violence is centralized and orchestrated by the government as a spectacle. But both texts reduce human life to something disposable for the greater good. In the lottery, Tessie Hutchinson is sacrificed for the village tradition and for good crops. In Panem, children are sacrificed for state stability. The critical difference is how the victims react. Tessie only screams, "It isn't fair," when her own name is drawn. Katniss, on the other hand, steps up before her name is drawn to save her sister, shifting the narrative from passive acceptance to active defiance. Underneath both systems lies the psychology of fear. In both worlds, the survival of oppressive systems depends on the silence of the majority. Why don't the villagers stop stoning Tessie? Because of fear and social isolation breaking societal norms. Why don't the districts march on the capital immediately? Fear of immediate destruction. Looking at the progression of resistance in the lottery, resistance is purely reactive and isolated to the individual victim. In the Hunger Games, Katniss moves from survival to proactive rebellion, which demonstrates that breaking compliance requires someone willing to shatter the illusion of control, such as Katniss pulling out the nightlock berries at the end of the book. To conclude, both Jackson and Collins leave us with a stark warning. Societies become dangerous the moment citizens stop questioning authority and tradition. The lottery asks us to look inward at the arbitrary traditions we follow today without thinking. The Hunger Games asks us to look outward at the power dynamic between governments and the media and to resist oppressive systems before they consume us. As we leave today, I want you to consider what are the lotteries in our own worlds that we accept simply because that's how things have always been done. Does society justify cruelty through tradition today? Thank you.